you. Thanks for tuning into the Waiting List podcast. I'm Long Long.
I'm Daniel.
And I'm Jacqueline. And we are three watch friends with a healthy obsession for watches.
So sit back and relax with us while we chat with collectors, industry giants, and share some good vibes. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. And today we welcome back someone to the pod that we have had on previously, albeit during the infancy of this podcast, a certain Angus Macdonald, previously mysteriously or unmysteriously, depending on how you see it, known as Mac in his previous episodes. Yes, we were very creative in coming up with an alias, which, let me see, would have been episode 40 and episode 58. If you haven't heard those episodes, then again, we recommend you listen to them. Part of the reason why we have asked Angus to come back on was because we enjoyed doing those episodes so much. I still remember them very clearly. And if you want to reach out to Angus, then you can find him on Instagram at WatchMadMac. So welcome to the show again, Angus.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back, and nice to see you, Lung Lung, and Jackie as well. It's the first time, Jackie, that you and I have, not the first time we've spoken in person, but the first time that we've had an opportunity to do the podcast. So it feels incredible that those first conversations with you were quite so long ago, and here you are, and I think you're probably around about your 100th odd podcast at the moment. So congratulations. I want to start by maybe just saying how much enjoyment I've had from so many of the podcasts that I've listened to. I think it's been a fantastic journey that you guys have been on, and having had the chance to spend time with certainly Lung Lung and yourself, Daniel, in person, I know how much you've both got out of it, and I'm sure Jacqueline yourself as well. But just for the benefit of those who perhaps haven't had the opportunity to go back, don't necessarily go and listen to mine. They're pretty gruesome in listening back to yourself, but you've done some brilliant ones recently. I particularly enjoyed Silas's one. I particularly enjoyed the conversation with Edouard Melon. I particularly enjoyed the one with Guido Tarani at Parmigiani. I think you've done some fantastic work, and it's fantastic to listen to some of the industry speakers that you've got on, and the fact that you've been able to get access to these people is a testament to your growth and success as well. So well done.
Right, we can definitely have you on again.
I'm going to up my roots now.
But in light of that, Angus, we also want to extend, a big thank you for supporting the podcast in its early phase. Especially, I know how discreet you are as a collector, and I also understand, many publications and magazines approached you to do interviews on numerous occasions, and you declined them. But when I came up to you, when I approached you, Angus, I know you decline a lot of interviews, and a lot of magazines have asked you to interview in the past, and you've just turned them away. But when I approached you, it was you accepted and you supported this platform just out of pure support. So I was saying you clearly knew where the next big thing was coming from.
Yeah, well, you have to give the struggling youth of the world this.
Like, just take my charity, just take it.
All I heard was youth. Youth.
No, okay. It took you a while to get me convinced to do this as well, I have to say. I think we went around the houses a few times before I agreed to do it. But yeah, I'm just super happy to support. Anyway.
Right, so we'll get on with the first question. So you've just come back from surgery. So first thing first, how's the arm?
Yeah, thank you. On the road to recovery. I'll try and keep the story short. If you have happened to listen to some of my previous podcasts, I'm big on the outdoors. So I do a lot of rock climbing, ice climbing, skiing, mountaineering, cycling, stuff like that. And often the worst injuries come when you least expect them sometimes. And it was one of those careless, stupid moments when I was out trail running back in January in Hong Kong on a perfectly blue sky day that we get here in January at that time of year. And I took a tumble, and unbeknownst to me, until 3 weeks later, when we got the MRI scan results, I shattered my humerus in 3 places and tore the tendon off. So fairly major surgery with various bits of metal work being put back into my shoulder. And as a consequence, now I'm stuck in a sling for about 6 to 8 weeks and have limited mobility. But we'll get there. So we'll get there. The good news is, and this is really important, my left hand, which is the one I wear my watch on, is fine.
I wanted to ask, do you think it's this outdoor personality of yours that allowed you to get the Vacheron Overseas Everest? Because you're one of the lucky few to get that piece.
Yeah, that's a story in itself, isn't it? And I did listen back. It's a long time since we did those podcasts with me in the infancy of the Waiting List podcast. And I did listen back to it, and I remember talking about Vacheron then, and I think I talked about how it was Vacheron Constantin was the very first manufacturer I ever visited. And my journey has taken me more towards JLC and other brands, but I always still have a fondness for Vacheron, and particularly when you go back through its heritage as well. But the story of the dual-time Everest was an interesting one, because I'd seen the piece here when Philips were auctioning Corey Richards' own piece that he was given as the prototype to go and attempt a new route on Everest, which ultimately was unsuccessful. And that's frankly irrelevant. The point was he was trying something, and he was trying something that hadn't been attempted before. And that's the important part to me, rather than going and just treading a well-worn path. He was exploring, and he was trying something new and different. And when I handled it, I, like many, many other people, I think, were badgering and talking to anybody who may or may not listen, or may not have any influence within the Richemont group, saying, you need to make this piece. This is crying out to go into regular production. It's brilliant. I mean, the overseas line has certainly in recent times been a great success for the brand. And interestingly, if you look at the recent report that's come out from Morgan Stanley in collaboration with the Geneva consultancy, you can see the effect that it is having for the brand's revenue. But there was no word that they were going to bring it out. And what happened was, I was actually back at my home in Switzerland last summer, just after I'd retired from work. And that's something else we can talk about at some point. And I was taking 3 months out, and I was up in the mountains, just doing just trying to do stuff. And suddenly up pops this announcement that Vacheron had released 150 pieces of the dual-time Everest and 150 pieces of the chronograph. And it was like, oh, hallelujah, fantastic. Oh, only 150 pieces. I'm never going to get one. So I messaged various friends in Richemont brands back in Hong Kong and elsewhere, saying, who's I need to speak to within Vacheron? And anyway, that resulted in a dialogue, a conversation going on with the retail brand, Vacheron retail director here in Hong Kong by WhatsApp, whilst I was in quarantine after I'd landed back in Hong Kong. And I said, look, I know I'm nobody. I have no history with Vacheron. But here's a little bit about me, and here's why I think it's fantastic that you've brought this out. I'm on the board of trustees of the Himalayan Trust UK as well, which is Sir Edmund Hillary's charity that he set up after him and Tenzing Norgay successfully first climbed Everest in May 1953. And Ed's mission when setting up that charity was to pay back to the people in the Solukhumbu region of Nepal in the form of health and education for the support and welcome that he had received when climbing Everest. So, I had this whole conversation going on with the Vacheron guy, and I said, look, I'm not pushing you because everybody's going to be demanding a piece out of you. So, I'm not that guy. I don't want to be just another person demanding something that is unobtainable. But when I get out of quarantine, if you have a piece for me to be able to see, that would be amazing. That'd be fantastic. So that's how it kicked off. And we left it at that. And then about 2 weeks after I got out of quarantine, I got a WhatsApp message from him saying, look, Angus, I'd love you to come in. We talked about meeting for a coffee. We've got a few museum pieces from Vacheron in the principal boutique here in Hong Kong. Thought you'd like to come and see them. I'd like to introduce you to the boutique manager here in Hong Kong, and just to have that coffee that we talked about. So I did. I went in. I thought, fantastic, that's great. Let's go in. And I spent the first hour just ogling and looking at all these vintage pieces, and just my breath being taken away by some of these beautiful vintage pieces, like the precursor to the Vacheron Constantin 1921, and some of these classic, you can, if you think about, and I know one that's dear to your heart, the Cartier Crash, and the different versions of that sort of era. Vacheron were doing some very unusual shape designs back in the 20s as well. So they had a lot of these pieces. So, and I could see them looking at their watches and saying, come on, Angus, there's something else we want to show you and talk to you about. Let's have a seat and have that coffee. So the first hour, we've just been circling the boutique, looking at old pieces. Sat down, they bring out a box and he opens it up, and lo and behold, there's a Overseas Dual Time Everest. And I said, oh, fantastic. That's so kind of you to let me see it. Thank you. And then he pulls it out, and it's covered in plastic. And he said, why don't you try it on? I said, no, I don't. It's just good enough for me to be able to see it. Thank you. And he said, no, it's covered in plastic. Don't worry. It's all wrapped. Try it on your wrist. Tell us whether it lives up to your expectation, given that you tried on the original prototype. So I did. And then they took it back off me and took the plastic off so I could see it under a loupe a little bit more close up and see the rotor with the relief of Everest from the Tibetan side, which was the side of the mountain that Corey Richards was approaching for his route. And was based off a photograph he'd taken. And then they said, oh, go on, try it on again. So no, look, this is somebody's watch. I'm not going to try on somebody's watch.
You must have known, though.
I didn't, honestly. Dan, I reckon I'm massively naive. I really did not for 1 second register what was going on. I genuinely thought this was somebody else's watch that he was allowing me the opportunity to see and handle, given the whole conversation that we had. I genuinely did not expect it. But what then happened, he said, no, try it on. And I said, look, if I try it on, I'm going to have to kill somebody. I mean, whose is this that I have to go out there and kill to be able to get this piece? And it was a superb piece of customer experience theater, and a brilliant demonstration to me of how an individual within a brand, be that whatever industry or retail type you choose, can make a difference. Because he just turned to me and he said, well, you're not going to kill yourself, are you, Angus? And it took about, maybe I'm getting a bit older, but it took a few seconds for that to register exactly what he meant by that. And then I just looked at him. I said, are you serious? And he said, yes, it's yours. and so, yeah, I consider myself very lucky, particularly given that I had no relationship with Vacheron Constantin here in Hong Kong whatsoever. But I know from speaking to them subsequently that I believe that they've been trying to do a bit more diligence around the allocation for those pieces, and speaking to a few other people that I know who have received it, or who are or have been previously at Vacheron or within the Richemont group. I know that they're quite sensitive to these things.
Yeah, so I have a question. First of all, I'm so happy for you. I remember watching that auction live of the actual watch that went on to the Everest. And I think it was my first auction that I ever first watch auction that I ever watched online. Yeah, because back then I had a good friend that was working at Philips, and she had just recently started at Philips at the beginning of that auction. So I was watching it to support her, and who knew that, I would also get dragged into this, right? But yeah, anyways, I remember that one very, very clearly. And my question is, we're all, as collectors, we're all familiar with just how difficult allocation has become over the past few years, right? And as the secondary market goes, very, premium times X times premiums of the original retail, like the brands do have to do their due diligence and allocate, pieces to right people. And you mentioned that, obviously you were very shocked because you didn't have that existing relationship with Vacheron. You haven't really bought pieces from them. So from your perspective, why, like, as someone who's just coming into the industry or is passionate about a particular watch that's really hard to get retail, what do you think is like the key determining factor in the brand's perspective that they see fit of allocating certain pieces to? Because so that's my first kind of question. And then my second question, in tangent to that, is like, do you feel the need to be vocal about how a certain watch does fit into your personal life? And do you think that makes a difference?
I'm going to take the second question first.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's the easier one to deal with. And the answer is no. I don't feel the need to be vocal about why a particular watch would fit into my collection and why I'm pursuing it, if you like. That might be simply a case of the good fortune that I may have built up, and in terms of the relationships that I built up through many, many years, that have perhaps meant I don't need to push that quite so far in terms of an agenda when I'm looking for a piece. But another reason, well, there's probably two other reasons why I think my answer to that question, Jackie, is no, would be, first, as Daniel said at the opening, I'm trying not to be too out there in terms of my collection. I'm very happy sharing it with passionate fellow collectors, and I've met great friends, and I've enjoyed the process of that, and I'm very open when I get to know people, but there's still a little bit of a veil that I'm quite happy to keep, and some degree of privacy around it. The third one is that perhaps that question originates from a reality, which is a lot of people are pursuing the same pieces right now, and therefore they're having to differentiate themselves to some extent as to why they should be worthy of getting that piece as opposed to another. Whereas I don't feel consumed by that. There's lots of great watches out there. There are amazing pieces from brands that, don't get the recognition they deserve, which are not as hard to come by. And therefore, maybe I'm more philosophical about it. If I can't get a particular piece, that's fine by me. I already know I've got a collection that I'm very lucky and honored and happy and proud and humble to own. But if I miss out on a particular piece, that's not going to be the end of the world for me. So that's maybe my answer to the second question. The answer to the first question, which, if I recall correctly, was around how do you develop that? How do you get to a point where you can get to the top of an allocation process? If I can try and paraphrase. Well, I think that's about, I guess I talked about this way back when in my previous podcast. It's about integrity, it's about honesty, and it's about the relationship. It's about building a relationship with people, and you're not going in and speaking to people, and every single time you go in, and it's about me, and what do I want. It's about, how are you? How's your family? How are things going? Having a conversation with people and getting to know them is an important part of this if you're genuinely committed to building up a long-term relationship. So the motivation as to why you're pursuing a particular piece, in some respects, will behaviorally drive the way in which you approach that chase, if I can put it that way. Mm-hmm. And I would question the motivations. So the motivations are, am I pursuing it for the right reasons? Do I genuinely love this? And I don't care if nobody else wants this piece. That's the piece I like. And I'm happy to have that piece in my collection. Versus everybody else. It's the herd instinct point, isn't it? The herd mentality. And we're probably in the midst of a bit of a bubble of that right now anyway. The herd mentality, the chase, it's all after particular pieces. And we're seeing, 4x, 5x, 10x times on certain pieces, which I find a little bit unhealthy. Well, I do find very unhealthy. And as a collector, it slightly takes away some of the enjoyment of the whole hobby, because that's what it is. It's a hobby. None of us need to be doing this. We're doing it because if we're genuinely a collector, rather than, I'm going to use the word, and it's a horrible one, rather than an investor, then if we're doing it as a collector, we're doing it, of course, everybody wants to preserve some value, but we're doing it out of passion. And the moment that passion starts to evaporate, so does the pleasure in the collecting.
Yeah, for sure.
That was a bit roundabout, Jackie.
No. It's a great way to answer it. The reason why I asked that question is I think I'm the least experienced out of the boutique experience out of the four of us. Mm-hmm. Basically started buying pre-owned, vintage, and secondhand, basically. And then recently on our few episodes in the past, we have started, even with Silas, right, started talking about just how hard it is to find quality to value watches in the current climate. So that's why Dan and I we've started to look towards brands such as like vintage models, trying to find value right within the price point and where people might not be looking at. So I absolutely agree with you. Like when the prices have been blown out of proportions, it's important to still keep that initial naivety, if I may say that, and look for things that still kind of tingle your heartstrings. But again, like, because I've never really had a boutique experience, I was just so curious as to, well, first of all, very curious as to how you must have felt at that moment when they were like, well, don't kill yourself. Like that must have been such a, I also don't know how I would react, but that was a great story. It
was a big surprise. And I said, look, next time I'm able to get to Nepal, because I over 25 odd years, I've been visiting Nepal, usually every couple of years at least, whether it be to go climbing personally or whether it be to be doing work on behalf of the charity. I said, the watch will go with me. You'll see it in its environment. It's not going to be a safe queen. It will get scratched up and it has. I've been out on the trails here in Hong Kong with it on as well. So here's, I'm putting it out here right now. Nobody would ever want to buy my piece because it's going to have so many scratches on it.
Yeah.
Right. I think it leads nicely to a question I have later, but Angus, the watch market has changed significantly since we last interviewed you. I don't think many people could have predicted it. I would like to hear your opinion. Why do you think it's changed the way it has? Why is this, call it a phenomenon or a bubble or whatever you want to call it? Why is there one? And also, how has it specifically impacted your own watch journey?
Right, so why has it changed? Why is there a bubble? And how has it impacted mine specifically? You can tell I was a lawyer in my previous life, can't you? There's a lot of complexity in that question, which, please just shut me up if I start rambling on too much, because I struggle to see how I can do this question proper justice. And I would say, I'd said to Daniel, for the benefit of listeners, I said to Daniel, I didn't want to get any of the questions in advance, and I was happy to just respond to this on a totally free flow basis. I wish you'd given me a heads up on this one. So why has it changed? There are a number of data points out there which would indicate why it's changed. We are in year 3 effectively of COVID globally, and that has been a contributor to this change undoubtedly. And in short, it's because people are staying at home, they're not spending their money on expensive holidays. So it's a truism that in times of crisis the rich continue to get richer. So at the very top, little percentages of society, people are probably continuing to do extremely well. But where the big difference is perhaps more in the sort of middle income bracket, where they are now not spending money on other things and therefore have an outlet to perhaps spend it on luxury goods. And you can see that actually in the financials and the reports coming through from some of the brands as well. It's very clear that certain brands have been doing very strongly in terms of their growth over the time. So why has it changed? COVID for one thing. I think the continuing impact of social media, it's not new. It's certainly nothing new in the last 2 to 3 years. It goes back long before that. But it's becoming more and more sophisticated. And whether it be through podcasts, whether it be through websites, the ability and opportunity to learn and educate oneself in the privacy of one's home about watches, about the history behind brands, about the heritage of brands and the heritage pieces, and how those in turn develop and lead forward into the current models, is far greater now than it was. It's a growth curve, and it's continuing to grow. So we're seeing a lot of that, and that is connected, of course, to COVID, because people have more time to sit at home and spend time on their laptop and study or chat with friends or look at websites and things like that. So I think those are two reasons. I think that the third is, and again, I think if you look at a lot of the reports, the impact of China as a consumer. And there's a big bucket there, and I'm calling China as a consumer as a sort of very generalistic statement, but the impact of China and how that is changing the fortunes of brands is significant as well. So the last thing I would say is, I guess as COVID is it was the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, here we are, and I guess by the time this is maybe published, middle of 2022, is 2.5 years it's been going on. People's behaviors have changed. We're not going into work in suits and a tie anymore, or men and women are less formal in what they're wearing a lot of the time. And there's perhaps been that move more towards sports, stainless steel sports watches. So I'm not the authority to opine on exact reasons as to why the prices have gone insane for your Rolex Daytonas, your Steel Sports Rolex watches, your APs, your Pateks, etc., the Vacherons now as well. But what I find positive about that, if I can turn what inherently I'm, as a collector, somewhat nervous about in terms of that bubble, but thinking about the positives, is how it's shined a light onto other brands. And given other brands the opportunity to fly. And, you know, perhaps we can come back to that, but I might leave it at that. So that tries to address the why has it changed question. Why is there a bubble, I guess, is very much linked to that. It's supply and demand fundamentally. And the circumstances of COVID, the use and dependency on social media as a forum for knowledge acquisition has driven new consumers to, in a very herd mentality sort of way, towards particular models. I don't have a criticism of that per se. I think because we all seek validation. We all want validation in what we're doing. And if you're new to watch collecting, then you do want to take some safe decisions, don't you? So there is safety in that. And the safety is from your peer validation. So that has created a little bit of a bubble. And then lastly, how has it impacted me? I don't feel that it has. I think I'm at a stage now, I mean, Daniel, we haven't really talked about this, but part of the reason why I was somewhat more secretive when we did the first podcast was I was still working. I was leading the operations and business for a UK headquartered large global institutional asset manager. And I was very conscious that I didn't want attention on that as opposed to on the conversation we were having during the process of the podcast, which was about watches. And I didn't want any conflation between the two or light being spilled across onto what it was I did from a career perspective. And I knew at the point that we did the last podcast that I was going to be retiring, and I'd planned my retirement for the summer of 2021. And therefore, I'm much more comfortable being open about who I am now. But how has it impacted me? Well, the change is more self-inflicted, really. I'm retired, so I don't have the same income coming in. So I'd like to add, I've retired relatively young, by the way, as well. So not compared to the three of you, of course, but you know, so I don't, now when I think about my collection, it's more about refining my collection rather than constantly being able to go out and just say, oh, I like that, I'll buy that. I have to think a lot more carefully about what I'm doing and why I'm buying a piece. So I think that's probably, it hasn't really impacted me. I've still been very fortunate in some of the pieces I've been able to get over the last year and a half since we last spoke.
Mm-hmm.
I have a similar question, but just it kind of links to the last thing that Dan asked you. But if you could bring something back that the younger generation are probably missing out or quote unquote missing out on now, in terms of watch collecting as a hobby, what would you bring back?
Patience.
Patience.
I would say, for me, and I think from what I've listened and heard and read about you, Jacqueline, as well, and Lyndon, obviously I know you, but I think this is something, I think, Jacqueline, this is something that you exhibit as well. You research, you're interested to research a particular piece and why. And for me, so Lung Lung, to answer your question, I think patience is key. It's about trying to, we're in a disposable society, aren't we? So it's like we go to IKEA, we buy a set of bookshelves and we throw them out when they fall apart. So I value and enjoy the hunting of a piece and the rationalizing of why I like and feel that a particular piece is right in the collection. I'll often sit with a picture of it as a screensaver for months while I'm hunting it. If it's a hard to get piece, if it's an older piece, or it's a particular piece. And it's the first thing I see when I load up the computer every day. Okay, do I still like it today? Does it still make sense to me? It's the ability to be patient in the pursuit of pieces is something that I think we may have lost a little bit today, because we are so, okay, I want it and I want it now.
I just want to say, like, I'm smiling because I'm doing it too. But then the reason why I'm doing it is because, like, I believe in the law of attraction, and like your mind subconsciously work towards something if you see it and you have like a board. But I'm just thinking, okay, if it worked for you and it worked for me, it must work. Like, more people should do it.
Well, I think it's interesting because you miss out on pieces. I mean, I'll give you a classic example of this. From my perspective, if one thinks about the biggest regrets, or what have I missed out on, that I really wish I could wind back the clock and have pressed the button and gone for it, it would be an FP Jaune T30. And it's a piece I saw years and years and years ago at FP Jaune's manufacturer and headquarters in the center of Geneva. I mean, I'm going back now 15 plus years. And I remember the awe that it created in me of this particular piece. And I just thought, one day. And even as recently as 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I could have picked up one of those for less than $100,000 quite comfortably. And I didn't, because I always thought there would be a time that I could do it. And it didn't make sense at that particular point in what I was doing and what I was collecting, for me to press the button and go for it. Whereas now, of course, the prices have gone stratospheric, and I can't see myself doing that now. So, you can be too patient and then you miss the boat. But then I bring you back to the comment I made earlier about it doesn't really matter, because there's so many other great pieces out there, as you know yourself.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, right. So next question, which kind of follows up to Dan's last, or actually your last answer to Dan's question, Angus, which is, during these 2.5 years or so, you've gotten your JLC engraved, which we saw in one of your most recent, there we go, Instagram posts. So tell us that story, and why did you decide to get that engraved and with a very special engraving?
So again, it's the story is on my Instagram feed, but I'll try and keep it brief, which I'm not very good at doing usually. But when I had always intended to retire somewhere between around mid-50s. And when I moved out to Hong Kong 7 years ago, back in 2015, it was always with a vision to establishing our offices here in Hong Kong, establishing them in Shanghai, achieving those goals. And then I wanted to be able to, and I guess I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I did have the option to be able to retire at a reasonably young age. and to spend more time pursuing my passions. I mean, you know, I want to spend a lot more time just on the periphery of the watch industry, just learning more and continuing to learn more, but also spending more time back in the mountains and outdoors. So I always sort of wondered what I would do to mark my retirement. And I knew how much an impact Hong Kong had made on me, both professionally and personally, and how much it meant to me. In terms of, you know, my personal journey and so many different elements that contributed to my growth, as I say, both professionally and personally. And so I was kicking around some ideas at one point, and I'd seen this concept of a flag, and, you know, I'm Scottish by background. I'm a bit of a mongrel. But I'm, you know, Scottish, if you try and pin me down, for sure.
Singaporean.
Born in Singapore, you know.
Scottish only for the rugby. I think you support England in the Ashes. I mean, that is
Well,
confusing.
you know, I've got to keep my mother happy, Daniel. I mean, she's English, so I've got to keep her happy. So I support England at cricket and Scotland at rugby for sure. So I wanted to weave the theme of my journey from Scotland to Hong Kong. So we put together a concept of the two flags, Scottish, or a representation. They're not replications, but a representation of the Scottish flag and the Hong Kong flag. And also, I remember well when I told my old team back in Edinburgh that I was moving out to Hong Kong, and one of my members of staff, a young lawyer who was Chinese from Hong Kong, said, well, you have to have a Chinese name, Angus. I mean, it'll be essential on your business card to have a Chinese name, just in the way as I, as a Chinese person, have a Western name. You've got to have a Chinese name, because when you're traveling up into Shanghai or Beijing, you'll need to present your card and so forth. So we developed my Chinese name, and I'm not going to try and butcher it by pronouncing it, or indeed to explain the meaning behind the characters. But if you look on my Instagram page, you'll see it on the pictures. But, you know, that's where the Mac comes from, of course. The Mai.
Can I just say something?
On you go, Jack.
I Googled your name.
Yeah.
Your English name. And then, because we were talking about, you know, Angus is coming up next week. And then I was just, I'll Google Angus and see what comes up. And I added Hong Kong, and then your, you know, Angus last name, Hong Kong. And then I'll send you the photo later. What showed up was all Mac burgers, like this very specific burger. And I shared it to the group. I was like, guys, you need to see this. Like, this is our guest next week.
If I had $100 Hong Kong dollars for every time somebody said, "Are you connected to McDonald's as in burgers?" I'd be able to afford all these stainless steel Nautiluses at 10x prices that they're going for now. Sadly, I'm not. But anyway, so with the JJ team, we pulled together this sort of concept, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And then what astonished me most was, having made the decision, the watch obviously had to go back to Switzerland to enamel in Le Sentier, the manufacturer, JLC Reverso. So engrave that, first of all, engrave it out, and they enamel it. And it was the CEO here in Hong Kong who came to me and said, Angus, we'd like this to be a gift from us, from JLC Reverso and from us.
Wow.
Mark your retirement and say thank you for your support, and over 20 plus years, 25 odd years, I guess, with JJ, which blew me away. I mean, again, you know, I've already given one example of customer service, but it properly left me and continues in the telling of it to leave me quite moved for something that is not insignificant in terms of the time it takes to do. The cost maybe less so, but still there is a cost associated with the execution of this, undoubtedly. But more the thought about it, and the fact that a brand which, while still part of a major conglomerate now, has the ability and can do that, just blew me away. I mean, I'm totally humbled by the fact that they did that for me, and I'm still a nobody when it comes to JJ collecting. Yeah, so I've given you two illustrations, I suppose, of how, and the theme that I guess is emerging from these stories is about customer service, and how people can cement relationships through small steps and gestures, which I'm not saying that they're small steps or small gestures, but they're maybe not massively significant as such, but can have a far greater and more meaningful impact with the recipient than the pure monetary value of it. And so, I'm totally blown away by that gesture.
Something you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, which is, buying essentially what you like, right? There's many watches on the market that you can go for, right? You don't have to follow the hype, right? But one thing I know that you also consider is when you look at the brand, because I think you look at, there are a bunch of watches at a certain price point where you can just go out on a whim and just get them, right, and enjoy them. But you also, I forget the feeling that you really want to invest in the relationship and the long-term thing. So you do consider the brand when you go into certain pieces. You have, for example, you've mentioned two brands there, JLC, AP, Vacheron, that you're starting to invest your time into. How do you decide which brands actually that you want to do that with? Because, I would say Lange is a brand that you could really go into. Yeah. That really fits your personality. But it isn't something that you've really invested into yet.
I love the closing yet. Thanks, Daniel. You're determined to get me in there, aren't you? You're absolutely determined to draw me in. Right. I'm going to start by saying watch collecting for me fundamentally has to have romance attaching to it. And yeah, I accept that this could be construed as being a very naive position, but I'm happy with that. I like that, because the moment I lose the romance of collecting, I think I would lose the passion. So romance isn't necessarily logical, is it? I buy pieces because they speak to me, or I connect with brands because relationships I form with people within those brands. And that's not necessarily born out of a purely logical, collection of all sorts of different points of data that lead me to conclude that, okay, it's gone over a tipping point of 78.7 in terms of my scale of thresholds, at which point I'm comfortable buying a particular watch. That's not how I approach this. It is a far more naive passion, a romantic story, I would suggest. So I inherently value the more nimble and more approachable nature of smaller brands, where you have the ability to get access to the watchmakers, or watchmaker singular, because of course that plays to the more romantic nature of it. That I like looking at the movement and playing with it and figuring it out and trying to understand it, and having that access to the watchmakers allows you to further develop that sort of naive appreciation, excuse me, which is lost somewhat when you get into the mega brands. JJ, by contrast, of course, is a mega brand and part of a mega group, a large conglomerate, but it still tugs at my heartstrings because of the history it has within the industry over so many centuries in terms of forming and developing movements for other brands. But also because it was one of the very first brands that I explored and started to learn about, and had the privilege and ability to go and visit and so forth. So they may be an outlier when you look at my collection in its entirety, but it's been there consistently with me on my journey, through the ups and through the downs. And what more of a statement of commitment is there than to get a piece engraved? Nobody will ever buy this. It's got my name on it. It's of no interest to anybody else. And so much so that actually I'm going to take and drop off my green Reverso, tribute to Reverso, my green one, and I'm actually asking them to. And I will be paying for this, to have something else engraved on the back of that one as well. So I'm avoiding unsuccessfly your question about Lange. I mean, we've talked about this many times. I mean, for me, it's just a rabbit hole. There's arguably, well, there's maybe one piece, but I'm not a massive fan of the new stainless steel piece, but sports watch. But across the range of Lange, there's pretty much nothing I don't like. I love every single piece, and their impact. And it's easy to talk about the in-house chronograph movement on the datograph, and how that was, they predated Patek Philippe in developing their in-house chronograph movement. And actually, I think it was a lady watchmaker who was integral to the development of that component. And forgive me, I can't remember her name. So the impact it's had, its position as a challenger to historically the principal three watchmakers of EP, Vacheron, and Patek. I'm not sure that stands true anymore. I think Lange is certainly well up there and probably beyond those. But for me, as I was saying earlier, now that I am sort of semi-retired, retired, is I'm more judicious, and I have to be even more thoughtful about what I'm going to spend my money on. And it may be that pieces have to go out in order for pieces to come in, and I just know that if I started off down that Lange rabbit hole, I would get lost, and I would be stuck down that rabbit hole for an awful long time, Daniel.
Okay. So something you mentioned in your answer there was that, access to the watchmakers or watchmaker and building that relationship and understanding the piece is, something that you do consider. You visited many manufacturers last year during your trip to Switzerland. Can you share with us, where you visited and any particular memorable moments for you?
Yeah, I'd like to have visited a lot more, and hopefully in the next few months I'll have the chance to do so again if I can get back to Switzerland. And in doing so, I'm doing it out of curiosity, inquisitiveness. I want to learn. it'd be lovely to be able to have the capital to be able to just buy everything you always wanted. But actually, in some respects, that would take some of the pleasure away from it, because we talked about patience and needing to be more thoughtful about pieces that you buy sometimes. And over the course of the collecting journey, you undoubtedly make mistakes. You buy pieces, and then, so I think, I remember we did a sort of quick answer question of me in the last podcast, whether it was a no way or whether it was, yeah, short, would I buy it and keep it for a while and then sell it, or was this a hold forever piece? And there's nothing wrong with buying pieces and selling them on for a while, but now I suppose I'm at a point where I'm less keen to do that. So I want to invest more of my time, and I have more time now to be able to do this, to learn more about watchmakers. So there's a list of them out there that I really want to meet with. But the one that was most memorable to me certainly was going in and meeting Recep and Annabelle at Akrivia. I first encountered Akrivia 3 years ago for his piece for Only Watch, his chronometer contemporain, which he released for Only Watch a couple of years ago. And when it was exhibited here in Hong Kong, it was like, wow. It's the level of simplicity and elegance of the presentation was just stunning. So I always knew I wanted to go in and spend time and ideally meet him and learn more. So I reached out to him, and Annabelle kindly said, look, why don't you and your wife come into the atelier and come and meet with us and spend a day with us. So we did. We'd been in FP Jaune, went back into FP Jaune as well in Geneva. And Akrivia is really not far away at all, short walk from FP Jaune's manufacture in the center of Geneva. And at the end of that first visit with Recep and Annabelle, and meeting Recep's brother and the team, and there are only 11 of them, it's a small team. I just knew I wanted to learn more. But what I'd said to him when we met was, look, I'm not here to plea for you for a watch. I'm not going down on my knees to say, sell me a watch, sell me a watch. I'm here because I'm inspired by what you've done. I love the fact, and I gave him a little bit of my history and how FP Jaune was an important part of my, dare to say collection, but I've got a number of FP Jaune pieces for sure. And Recep started at FP Jaune, so he started working. So for me, on one hand, I've got Francois Paul, who's, probably, he's changed the game in the independent watch space. One of a number of people who changed the game. And I am inspired and in awe of everything he's done. And he's perhaps towards the end of his career as a watchmaker. Whereas here we have Recep on the other hand, 30, young, early 30s, as almost a protege. And I love that. So I wanted to learn more. And at the end of it, he said, look, Angus, we need to spend longer. We need more time. I'd love you to come back and just come back to the atelier, because he knew I was in Switzerland at my home for a couple of months. And he said, look, come back. I'm developing the piece for Only Watch at the moment, the next piece, and the CC2. So that'll be finished by X date. And if you could, why don't you see if we can come back in after that and let's have lunch. So I did. So I went back, took a 2-hour train ride from my home back into the center of Geneva, just to have lunch again with Annabelle and Recep and sit down with them and learn more and just understand them more and the philosophy. I was really intrigued. I think one of the questions I was really intrigued about was why Akrivia and why Reshepi on the branding between the AK06 and the chronometer contemporain. And he's talked about it enough, so I'm not sharing secrets here. But his humility about, well, when I started out, I wasn't sure anybody would want to buy a watch with my name on it. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's fundamentally what it was. And I said, well, no, I want to buy the watch because it's got your name on it. Because I'm buying, if I'm a collector and we're fortunate enough at any point to buy one, I'm buying you because I'm buying your vision of what you're trying to do with the brand. I was inspired by that. I really, really, truly was inspired by that. I don't know if I'll ever get one of his pieces. I'd love to, but even if I don't, I told him I'll follow his journey and be there, annoying him and popping into Geneva Atelier anytime I get the chance.
I have a follow-up question. I also had the opportunity to visit the Atelier in November of last year, and I was going during the Only Watch auctions and the other, all the other auctions actually. So it was really a really busy time for them.
Yeah.
And I went alone, and they were very gracious to give me their time. Met Richard, met Annabelle and Jevdet, and really wanted to meet Mr. Hagman. Like that was, yes, I went there to meet Richard and Annabelle, but I really wanted to meet Mr. Hagman, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if I had to choose, but I don't want to, but if I had to. And so the first time I went, he wasn't there because he was off on he was off for the day because he only works in the mornings, and I went in the afternoon.
Sure.
And Annabelle said, well, why don't you come back and then to meet with him, and then we can have lunch together. I said, oh yeah, I would absolutely love that. So I went back in the second time, but they were so busy, couldn't really work out lunchtime, but I got to meet with Mr. Hagman, and that was one of the highlights of my trip. And although I speak very rudimentary French, he was so patient with me and showing me the tools and his work table and every little thing that I was inquisitive about. He was patient enough to explain to me. And I think at one point Annabelle had to go out and take a phone call because they were receiving phone calls every 2 minutes, right? The door wouldn't stop ringing. So it was just me and Mr. Hagman, and he was so passionate, showing me everything. And I was just like, yes, I can't really understand, but through body language, I can maybe work out what you're trying to say. So that was just, it was a surreal experience to meet him.
I totally agree. I think Jean-Pierre Hagman, if you think about his influence on Patek Philippe and the minute repeating every minute repeater, Patek Philippe going back for however many years, has his stamp on it. And I don't know, did he show you his personal stamp? So he took great pleasure in bringing out, and here's my stamp, the JPH stamp that you'll get on every case that he makes. And he's a lovely gentleman. And I just find that inspiring how Reshet can persuade Jean-Pierre Hagman, Mr. Hagman, to come out of retirement effectively and come and work for him. So you've got this gentleman who, I don't know, charitably in his 70s, but I think maybe a little bit more, I don't know, working with young, Reshet in his early 30s. And I know that what's on the horizon there is going to be phenomenal as well in terms of pieces coming out down the road. So that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. I was very keen to go in and see David Thune as well, but all their pieces were out on a roadshow, so we've left that to another time. Of course, I went back in to see FP Journe. Anytime I'm in Geneva, I pop in, say hello, which is nice. I think there's, part of the purpose was to go up to the AP Museum. And we haven't interestingly talked much about Audemars Piguet so far, but I was I think my wife and I, AP looked after us extremely well. They were kind enough to put us up in a hotel on the shores of Lake Geneva, and asked if they wanted a car sent down for us to bring us up. And I said, no way, that's a fantastic drive up to Le Brassus from the valley floor. I'm driving that one myself. So we had a great day up at AP Museum, catching up with the team there and seeing around. And I think we were one of the first non-Swiss visitors to it because of COVID. It hadn't properly opened up internationally, and they'd not really been receiving many international visitors. And the way that the architect has been able to, I want to do some more research into the architect behind that, because the way that they've been able to create the harmony of the building, the concept of the structure of the building, taking design cues from the world of horology, and keep it open and bright and spacious and make it exciting and a joy to walk around and visit. It's an incredible success, absolutely amazing success. I'm really hoping on my next upcoming visit back to Switzerland that I'll be able to stay in the new hotel, which is opening any day now, I believe. So I'm looking forward to getting back there again. So, I spend a fair bit of time. I had some meetings with people from JJ as well. So it was great. It was fantastic. That's what I love about, being able to get overseas and being able to travel, and which I've missed out on, is the ability to get over and spend time. And it's, we have to play, there's a balance between taking up people's time and being that demanding client, saying, I want to come and meet you.
Yeah.
But so far I've been fortunate, and people have been very gracious with their time, but I'm conscious at the same point to not sort of take too much advantage of that.
How was the curation at the museum, like with the pieces? Did you get to, you must obviously see vintage AP pieces are generally pretty rare anyway, right? Like,
yeah,
even on the auction scene. So to get it all in one roof is quite an experience.
I was really, really keen to see the sort of remaster, which,
yes,
from the 1940s, or the original watch that resulted in the remaster as issued a couple of years ago, which I have. And I think they have some phenomenal pieces in the collection. I no doubt, much as Patek have done over the last, 20, 30 plus years since they opened the museum, they continue to curate that museum and seek out and search for pieces to add to the museum. No doubt AP will be doing the same, I'm sure. But you're right, if you go back and you look at the Grand Complications Audemars Piguet book, it has an index of all the different pieces and how many were issued and manufactured in a particular year. They made very, very few complicated pieces in many years back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So finding these pieces will be an art and a challenge in itself for them to continue to add to the museum, which I'm sure they intend to do. But as it stands and as it is at the moment, it's a fabulous blend of modernity plus a reflection on the history of the brand, which I felt was done in a very empathetic, meaningful, engaging way. So huge admirer of what they've achieved with that.
I thought it was great that they bought for themselves in the museum the original drawing of the Royal Oak from the recent auction.
Yeah, agreed.
I thought it was well done.
Right? Drawing over 500,000 Swiss francs or something, I think it went for.
Yeah. I bought the perpetual calendar one, but like the Gerald Genta drawing, like of his own brand. But anyways, when when I was there in November, I met someone from the retail store there, and when I won my lot, and we've been talking about it, right? Because Gerald Genta's wife visited there boutique, and I was talking about the auction and whatnot. And I said, oh, those would be really fun. Like, I know where I'll frame it and whatnot. And they're like, and she's like, did you know the AP bought it? I was like, oh, I didn't, but now it makes sense. Like, it should go to AP. It should go back to AP.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I think that's great that they did that. I mean, it's my naive notions of being able to bid on it were put to bed very firmly.
Yeah.
So what numbers go through the roof.
Yeah. Well, you could have picked one up for a lot cheaper.
Exactly, I know that. Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how, well, there you go. We talked about the hype and the sort of bubble that we're in, and how that is created. And this year is going to be a phenomenal year for Audemars Piguet with 50th anniversary, and we've already seen releases. And I was very lucky last year to get the very last of the 15202 pieces in platinum with the green. It's interesting because they've continued that through into the 50th anniversary with the 16202. But actually, for me, and again, this comes back to the romance of it, whilst perhaps slightly disappointed that they brought the 16202 out in platinum with the green dial as well. It was, for me, it's a case of, if you put them both in front of me, I'd have chosen the 15202 because it has the JJ derived 2121 movement, which is the original movement. So the romance of the piece was important to me. But this year we're going to see, if anything, even more of a bubble and even more hype around Audemars Piguet, for sure.
For sure.
Right. Well, you've mentioned it, and now you're retired, and I just want to move on to, away from watches. That was I think one of the purest collector talks we've had, and I think probably like the audience listening, it's always very telling when me, Long Long, and Jack don't really say much, right? Because we're just transfixed and we're just listening. And
it's just because I'm rabbiting on too long. That's
no, it's not. I would say it's actually the truest form of when we're actually offline and actually meeting collectors, right? We're not actually the protagonist. We're always like actually probably more quiet. I'm probably, to be fair, I'm probably the loudest, but still, this is what I love. I mean, we're very good friends, and I love when I go down to Hong Kong sitting with you. I make it a thing where, like, selfishly, I will meet you up privately because I just want to hear, give you my full attention, right, with no other distraction, because I just love the interactions that we have. So yeah.
It's reciprocated, Daniel. Don't worry. It's I think there's a I think be careful that you don't ascribe to me beyond what I'm worthy of, because it's like I'm just a naive, humble, collector who indulges his passion with not necessarily a great deal of structure around it all the time.
Or maybe that's what I do subscribe to, and you feel like really downplayed that, but I have the luxury of meeting a lot of collectors, and you do too. And I would say, that is, with all respect, to collectors, it's actually very hard traits to keep and maintain, especially in a group herd mentality.
Yeah, no, you're right. Can I just say before you move on to anything else, but I would really encourage people to listen to, I did think, and I talked about Parmigiani in when we spoke a year and a half ago, and I really, really enjoy, particularly the one with Guido Terani talking about what his philosophy around luxury and so forth, and how to grow. And I thought that was an absolutely brilliant episode. And then again, more recently with Silas at a Collected Man. I'd met Silas only once here in Hong Kong, and I actually sent them a message after listening to that podcast, because it was directly to them. I thought that was a really good one. So I guess it's always interesting to hear from a collector, because all our journeys are different. But the ones I really, really enjoy is sometimes getting a little bit of an insight into the business side of it as well. So,
Yeah.
it works both ways. So I'm always
Yeah.
learning as well, Daniel. So keep going with this as well. Anyway,
Well,
what
yeah,
do you
we
want?
we all like we like, to be fair, like the industry ones, we always they can go like either way, because you can get really generic PR answers, right, which don't actually shed so much light on actually the question you asked. And something that we wanted to keep, that we do want to keep, that's really important to us, is that we don't go to this like, yeah, it's great to get these amazing guests on, but the podcast itself was always based around collectors and their own journey. And I think that we have to, stay humble and keep to what we are, as well as enjoying the stuff that this allows us to do, which is, reach our network to people that, quite frankly, we never thought that we would interview. Like at the start of this, like 2 years ago, and some of the guests that we have potentially lined up, there would have been no access. I don't even know how you would like start that relationship to even get them on. And one thing that we appreciate on the podcast that I didn't appreciate at the time was, when you do a podcast with somebody, you prepare, you research. Sometimes we do the pre-call, and then you spend time with them on the podcast, and then you might continue that after the podcast. But by the time you've done that, you've already invested 4 hours of pure time into that individual. And in that way, you've built that relationship with that person, because it's very hard now, especially, during COVID, to allocate 4 hours to a person. And because of the podcast, we can go directly to asking questions without the initial like gentle phase, because that's the purpose of it.
Yeah. And I think it's subject for a different conversation, perhaps with people more expert than I, but this is where the role of social media, podcasts have, from a brand development perspective for brands, and this has been touched on with the podcast I think you did with Oris, is becoming more significant as well. So brands are probably more receptive to your approaches, or the industry is perhaps more receptive to approaches as a mechanism through which they can gain exposure, because it doesn't have the advertising cost or budget which is associated with the billboards on Nanjing Road, or in Central in Hong Kong, or wherever it might be. They just have to invest some time. That's the cost associated with it. So I think there's value for them in engaging with you as well. So there's something that they get from these sessions.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because we talked about like social media and how intricate and developed that is increasingly becoming. But podcasts, there is an insatiable appetite for knowledge on watches, and the podcast medium is another avenue, but it's a very specific avenue on where you want to have a discussion on watches and get the information from. Arguably, if it's done correctly, it can shorten a lot of time in finding the information you require if you click on the right one. And a lot of other platforms just find it difficult to get to that depth very quickly.
Yes, agree. Absolutely, totally agree.
Yeah. But you have since retired. That's something that's changed. We've got 2 years older. You haven't, but you've retired. So how has it been for you? And generally, how do you keep yourself busy? Because you picked an interesting time to retire, because of, you're straight into COVID.
Yeah. Well, as I touched on earlier, I think, when I moved to Hong Kong in 2015, I'd been the sort of general counsel, head of legal for the business, the global head of legal, for 20 odd years. So I'd already worked with my company for 20 years, and moving to Hong Kong was with a set of goals in mind and targets that I was looking to accomplish. And so I'm, I suppose, as a person, as a character, as an individual, somebody who plans. I can be spontaneous, but I do like planning, and I like the process of executing a plan. And not necessarily the best person at finishing that off. I like surrounding myself with people who are brilliant at doing that sort of thing. So even at the point of moving out to Hong Kong, I already had in my mind what the time horizon was going to look like. And so I had, for many, many years, targeted retiring around my mid-50s, if I was fortunate enough to be able to do so. We had been back at our home in Switzerland in 2019, before COVID, of course, and my wife and I had sat down and talked about what the next few years were likely to look like for each of us. And I said, I'm thinking I might retire 2021, and if I'm going to do that, I want to tell my company, best part of a year in advance, so that we can plan the transition and the handover. So we made that decision, and then I told my direct boss, my CEO, and my direct boss, end of September 2019, that I wanted to retire in summer of 2021. So I'm getting my years wrong here. So this would be 2021. So it would have been September 2020. So we had plenty of time in which to plan that transition across. And my intention in retiring was that we would stay in Hong Kong, and my wife is successful in her own right with a very good career, and is keen to keep that going for a number of years. And so we want to stay in Hong Kong, but we didn't foresee, obviously, that COVID would be continuing, and that Hong Kong would, as it currently is, then ultimately go through its worst episode of COVID. So it's rather put a bit of a pause on a lot of my plans that I did have for retirement, which were fundamentally, to keep it short, I had a long list of things that I'd written down about cycling the length of Taiwan, cycling down the length of Vietnam from north to south, spending time in Bhutan, spending a lot more time back in Nepal, both climbing and with charity that I'm on the board of, spending time in Pakistan. I've never climbed in Pakistan. I wanted to go climbing in Pakistan, spending a lot more time skiing, and stuff like that. So, I'm fortunate that I've got a very supportive wife who is very happy and keen for me to be able to do that. And of course, COVID has meant that, like many, many people on this earth, we've all had to adjust. So I've not had that opportunity to do that. But in the scheme of things, it's a minor price to pay compared to what a lot of people are going through.
Should we go one more question before the reverse round?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so based on what you have just answered, I'm sure we all think this. You have a lot of positive energy, right? And I personally feel this is the reason you kind of make everything look very easy, like your career, your marriage, like you can have your life together, basically, right? And our lives are falling apart. Okay, so
get your shit together.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Yeah.
Do you have any practices or mantras that you think allow you to think this way?
Not as in I get up every morning and I spend half an hour doing yoga and sun salutation. I do yoga. What I would say, you've got to work a damn sight harder to keep supple and flexible when you get to my age, Lung Lung. So, but I am an optimist, and I would rather be moving forward and thinking positively. And I think it's not to say, and at the risk of oversharing here, I think undoubtedly the last few years have seen many, many people have periods where they've been super anxious or very down, and I'm not immune to that as well. I mean, everybody will have gone through that, but I don't know what it is about me or why I'm able to do it, but I choose to try and be a bit more positive and optimistic and look forwards rather than what I am very, very good at is, even if you take my accident recently, it happened. Okay, forget that. There's no point being, why did that happen to me, and being all gloomy about it. Right, okay, let's get the operation done, let's get the surgery done, and then let's get to the physio, and let's go through the pain and working with the physio to regain the mobility in my shoulder and try and do everything that's necessary. So I'm not going to feel sorry for myself and look backwards. I'm going to choose to move forward, and that's.
I think there's what I think is you're gonna hate this, Angus. But like for me, you always have an aura, an energy that is like clearly noticeable, that sits above everybody else. Like, I know you hate that, but that's how I feel when I'm like with you. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, because when you are in the room, and admittedly, you are more experienced than us, but I don't think that is enough to do that, like to have that impact where I sit there and I just want to listen, and I want to engage, I want to learn, and I want to see like what makes this person so like conduct himself in such a way that I can take from and use it, on myself. That's how, I don't know if that's coming across in the podcast, how you are, but that's certainly how I feel. And I think, Long would feel the same way. And I've sang, multiple praises to Jacqueline. I said, when you see me, Angus, you'll know what I mean. I think that's what it's.
I need to introduce you to some of my friends of my age. They'll tell you you're talking absolute rubbish, and you really don't know the true Angus. Again, you're giving me more credit than I'm due for sure. But I mean, I'm humble and honoured that you think that way, but it's not. I'm not sure it's deserved for sure. And I know. I know I've got plenty of friends who would say that. Yeah, I don't recognise that, Angus. But nonetheless, thank you.
I'll save you the embarrassment, and we can move straight to the reverso round. So please, you can go shoot your answers and make us feel uncomfortable now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Lung Lung and Daniel, I know you both well, so I'm going to start with Jacqueline. And actually, I've got two questions for you, if I may. I think we maybe slightly touched on these, and I've certainly heard you talk a little bit about them in the past. But, firstly, I mean, are the mistakes, and I know you're relatively new to this, so this is why I wanted to ask you this question. Are there any mistakes that you would own up to having made so far in your collecting journey? By that, I guess what I'm meaning is, what have you bought that you have thought on reflection, actually, I shouldn't have bought that? Or conversely, what haven't you bought that you said, oh, I wish I had bought that one? So that's my first question.
I'm going to be an Angus and take notes. What's your second question? Give it all to me.
Okay, the second question is, I know you bought mostly, if not exclusively, online so far, and that's been no doubt partly as a result of COVID and our inability to get out there and go and visit and see things. And so the question is really, do you feel that you have missed out on or lost out on the tactile element of being able to handle a piece and physically see it up close in person and look at it under a loupe? And maybe that has some relationship to the other question as well, the first question.
Okay, so if I may, I'll also answer the second question first while we're on it. And before I answer that, I want to just do a quick little drawback to Dan's question to you, which is, like, what do you see in a brand to make you want to support it or build a relationship with it, right? For me, when Dan was asking that question and I was listening to your answer, and Long's probably going to laugh at this, but the first thing that popped into my mind after you answered your question, Angus, was a quote that I read on the midst of social media about, now I don't know if you're familiar with this, but basically Kim Kardashian's new relationship. And
I'm totally down with it.
Yeah, but it'll make sense. Just hear me out. So obviously, like, Kim Kardashian was married to Kanye. Now they've separated, and now she's dating this SNL comedian called Pete Davidson, who has this image of him to, he's not particularly the Hollywood dreamy looking type, right? And yet, if you look at his relationships and past relationships, he's dated some of the like hottest stars, like most famous celebrities out there. So like Ariana Grande, Kate Beckinsale, and now Kim Kardashian, right? So the Western media was like, what is it about Pete Davidson, right? Like, they were trying to figure it out. Like, what is it about him? Like, what's his allure to these? And then one of his friends came out to the media and was like, hey guys, you've been analyzing his looks and how he portrays himself, which in 99% of the time is very humorously, because he works in for SNL, right? He's a comedian. But have you just considered that he might just be a very genuinely nice guy? Because you see all this media portrayal to being, oh yeah, he doesn't deserve this girl, like he's such a joke. But have you really just sat down and considered like how nice of a family guy he is, and how nice he is to his parents? And so anyways, why did I bring that up is because going back to Dan's question for you, like, what is it that you see in brands that makes you to want to build a relationship with him? And I just thought, well, maybe because they're just nice. Like, yes, they're a big conglomerate or small independent brand, but maybe it's just because they're nice people that you want to hang out, right? And what does that have to do with your second question? A big part of me wished that I had the opportunity to have met the people that you have met. I haven't. The first time that I did have that opportunity was last year in November. And I had a very limited amount of time to meet the people. And it was such a busy time of the year, didn't have enough and didn't have enough time to do the things I wanted to do. Primarily from buying online, I have missed out a lot of chances to not only see the pieces in person, but also meet the watchmakers and visionaries behind the brands. So, definitely, I want to change that, and I'm more motivated than ever to go out to Europe and Switzerland and meet people, and hopefully they'll give me their time, and maybe go for a meal with them and listen to their stories instead of just reading their stories online, right? Mm-hmm. So that's, I guess, my answer to your second question. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering where you were going to go with the whole Kim Kardashian story.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
I was scratching my head a little bit with that one, but you got there, and I understand. So.
Okay, good, because we did a peer review episode, and Dan and Long were like, sometimes you just need to shut up. Like, what you're talking about doesn't make sense. So now I'm very alert of it. But I hope that makes sense for you guys.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. Now, for your first question about mistakes, actually, I've never really regretted what I have bought. Most of my regrets come from the pieces I have sold. And why have I sold them? Now, looking back at it, it's because I didn't take my time with them. And it all goes down to another one of your previous answers, which was patience. Mm-hmm. I don't think I had the patience and the time I had with each and single one of my pieces, because I kind of bought a lot in a short time. I remember when, and you know, the first time that we spoke was on Clubhouse, and this was brought up in one of the questions was like, again, like to do with regret or your favorite piece, I think. And my answer was very real. I don't have a favorite piece because I haven't had the time to make memories with my watches. It's COVID, couldn't travel. I bought a lot. Like I think I bought somewhere between 40 and 50 watches within 2 years. And I rushed into it in some sense. And my excuse for it, like if I were to try to make myself feel better, it's because I was trying to learn so much in a very short amount of time that I was getting pulled in all different sorts of directions. And that I didn't have the luxury of experiencing each piece before I bought them, right? Like meetups and whatnot. Maybe I wouldn't have bought them, but still wanted to experience them. And that's why I went ahead and bought a lot. But in buying a lot, I also had to sell I don't have unlimited budget, right? To acquire new things to keep me going. And in essence, some of my regrets come from selling pieces too early before I had the chance to fully live with it and experiment and experiment with it. So
I can relate to that, Jackie. I think it's a good answer, and I don't think it's not something that you need to beat yourself up about either. Not that I think you are, but I think it's a process. It's a phase, and it's an important part of, and it's a bit of a cliche, but it's an important part of the journey for all of us. And it doesn't actually end. That's the other thing. You know, here am I, 25 years into this hobby, and it goes through peaks and troughs. And, you know, I'd say it's really only in the last 12, 15 years that I guess I've become more educated, and you still find yourself questioning what is your particular personal style, and what is your particular personal philosophy when it comes to constructing your collection. And through that journey, as much as it is for me now as it is for you at the beginning of it, you continue to make mistakes. So I choose to value those mistakes, if one calls them that, and learn from them. And I think, you know, the difference now, when in retirement, is the phase I'm in now is partly perhaps a bit more consolidation, but equally there's still watches I'll want to buy, and that will by necessity mean that pieces have to be let go. So you know, you in the different phases of the journey, again, being very sort of simplistic and cliched about it, everybody goes through this. But what I would reassure you is that I'm still going through it in my mid-50s after 25 years of the journey of buying pieces. And I think that why I asked that question particularly was because your experience and where you are at right now has been wholly during a global pandemic, a period of a global pandemic, which has resulted in a set of circumstances which have meant that you've had to approach it in the way you have done. So it's going to, think how liberating and how fantastic it's going to be when we can all just jump on a plane and we can, let's go and meet up in Geneva, and we'll go and visit this and this. I mean, your eyes will just, you know, you're going to have so much fun. Well, so am I, when we all get to do that again. So it'll be fantastic as and when it does happen. So thank you. I think that answers it. And by the way, and you are also quite discreet and humble about what you're buying, and I admire that. And I think that what I have seen of what you bought, you're doing a good job, which I well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you want somebody looking after the odd piece in Hong Kong, I'm sure I can find a place for them. So good on you.
Move on, Angus. Move on.
Yeah,
I've got that title.
Okay, Daniel, your turn then. You touched on it earlier a little bit, and I know it's also true for Jacqueline as well. But Daniel, from your perspective, I think you and I do share in some certain characteristics in common, in that you have an aesthetic passion for your watches. I think you're not. You seek out subtlety and classicism a little bit, and aesthetics. You're very understated. You're not seeking, as I see it, to overtly display anything on your wrist in any way. You're not about presenting any particular image. So, and I respect that. I think that's a good thing. But talk to me a little bit about Movado. I know you touched on it earlier, but you've just recently acquired an absolutely beautiful piece, and I share some of that aesthetic values that perhaps led you down the road to choose that particular Movado, and I see them in vintage Vacherons and vintage Jaegers and things like that. But it speaks to this point that if you're genuinely invested in this as a hobby and have and embarking on it with romance and hopefully still some naivety, because naivety creates that energy to invest time to learn, then it can lead you to all sorts of fantastic older pieces. So I'm really interested to learn the story a bit more about how you acquired that. Yeah, well, I'm very selective on the pieces I decide to acquire. It does take me a long time before I actually decide, this is the piece for me. And that's because, I get to touch and feel and talk to so many collectors, and I get to really experience some of the pieces that they have acquired. And then I find, over time, over 2-3 months of handling certain pieces, that initial lust to own it actually goes. So I would say my journey is very different from many other collectors like Jack's, where a lot of the experience is taken about actually purchasing it, owning it, and then getting rid of it. With the way that the situation is with the watch market, there's just so much attention given to certain, not even pieces anymore, like just brands in general, right? That it's switched me off, and it just makes it a little bit more convoluted for me to navigate. And in that kind of situation, I would decide not to act. However, you mentioned my vintage Movado. I've always been a fan of triple calendar styled watches, right? And you have a particular very special heirloom JLC triple calendar watch. I've always loved the aesthetic of that piece. That modern pieces, I would say aside from Oris, failed to capture the purity and the cleanliness and of that dial design. I know Vacheron have recently released it, but it just doesn't exude that energy that you find in the classic pieces. Agreed. And, originally it started with the Omega Cosmic, because I still wanted a triple calendar with a brand, right? They started getting quite popular, and they're not that hard to actually find, right? And part of, I do want something that is exclusive and still very difficult to find in good condition. And so eventually I got onto, kind of just through research on vintage Movado, celestigraphs, astrographs, this kind of design. And what more, the ceiling fact was, the brand is just not even recognized generally by except as collectors as being any kind of hype brand, right? But when you have something so beautifully designed, there is no argument to it. You see it. You look at not just the dial,
but also the case and the lug design, how strong that is. It's such a complete watch for me. And then once you factor in the size of the watch itself, how, you mentioned that I don't really like to have my watches speak before I even enter the room, right? Then that is just a perfect size for me, and just works as well, because I do meet a lot of people. What do I want to say about myself? And I think it's encapsulated in that watch, right? And if it doesn't resonate with you, maybe there's a good chance that the conversation I have with you about watches isn't really what's going to stimulate me per se to a level. But if you do kind of value it, then maybe we can start that discussion, start that relationship. So that watch is very special for me in that it just encapsulates me. And we talk about another watch, right? Last year I also purchased the JLC Reverso, right? Yep. Again, nothing you would like shout about, right? Scream about, but design, it is just on point, right? I'm talking about not just, again, I look at the watches. It's great to have a great dial, but the case, it's a complete thing. You should assess the aesthetics on the. And the Reverso has always been a piece that the thinner it is, that elegance just oozes out, right? Like, and we see a lot of pictures on Instagram where you just see the face on. You never see the movement of the piece on the wrist, and how it fits in with that piece, right? I think works so well with any cuff, right?
Well, so I think JJ, the Reverso comes in many different sizes, of course.
Yes.
And some people struggle with it on their wrist because of the shape of their wrist. And so it is a case, for me, the Reverso is one that you need to go in and be able to try on and try the different sizes to understand. It'd be very difficult to buy a Reverso online without having tried it. You need to have them on the wrist. I would just add to that I think going and seeking out vintage Reversos is something that could be a whole rabbit hole that I could spend a lot of time down as well. So it's when one thinks about JJ's impact across the industry in terms of the movements they've made, whether it be like my triple calendar moon from 1948 or 49, I think it is. And that movement that was used in many other far better known, perhaps, brands. And I think, you can go back into vintage, and the challenge is to try and be agnostic at best, or in fact, totally ignore the name on the dial. And look at the quality, and I think you articulated it actually very well. Look at the quality of the case, of the dial, of the hands, of the finishing, of the movement, and revel and just bathe in that quality, not in whose name it is actually on the dial necessarily as well. I think it's a good lesson for us all.
Yeah. I think as you progress through the journey, you have more confidence to buy without the power of the brand. And also you have more confidence in your own ability to judge what is a good watch, right? Like we're talking about the details and the subtlety of the balance of the dial, for example. I think at the beginning, when you buy watches, you can tell, like, I don't like this, I like this, but you maybe not be able to articulate why, right? But as you get more experience, you can definitely pinpoint certain things. And, for example, the dial has applied minute indices, right? Where are you going to find that now? Right. And then, that journey with that watch as well, I put the voice out that I'm looking for that piece, right? Because it's, I'm looking not for a rubbish version. I want a good one. And, Long Long was the one that actually pointed me to the direction of that watch, because she knew about it. She also loved it. And, what's touching is that she passed on it to, like, let me know about it, and let me kind of acquire that. And that's why that piece is, extra special because of that, it also, there's a great friendship there.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's you just haven't received the bill yet, have you, for the finder's fee? How many dinners is going to be?
Luckily, Long Long's cheap. Shake Shack all the way. But if I'm feeling like, economically stretched, I'll just take it to McDonald's, which is actually cheaper than Shake Shack. Exactly. Single hamburger. Forget the Happy Meal. Any package. They're like, no, you're just having a hamburger. Yeah. So thankfully, she's a cheap date.
Well,
I didn't know that part of the story. So
well, you also didn't know that it's our couple's watch.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. I got to say, another thing is that it certainly helped that Jacqueline bought her Movado, which is just like, Angus, if you've seen mine, sometimes I looked at hers and I thought, okay, you've wiped the floor. Great. You've just wiped the floor. Like
but who was it that was making fun of me when I bought this? I also made fun of myself when I bought it, because I bought this in almost 2 years ago. I just never picked it up. And so when I bought it, and I think it was like, it was a lot to have paid for it. But I mean, again, from what we were talking about earlier, right? I'd never seen the watch in person, but there was just something about it when I saw the photos of it, right? First of all, it's a pink gold, 1930s, 1940s, with black gilt dial, Dauphine hands, and original buckle, original everything, and plus Chinese discs, right? Which when I saw it, I was just like, where do you find something like this? Now, I wasn't familiar with vintage Movados at all. I just thought, looking through the catalogs, and it was the first time I ever bid on something via auction. And when I bought it, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I think I went over my head. I don't think I should have paid this much, because listen, the estimate for this watch was $3,000. And my friend was like, Jack, you should bid for it. It's only $3,000. I was like, okay. And I hopped onto the phone, and I still remember the lady helping me. I was like, okay, starting bid.
Helping.
Yeah, helping. Starting bid. I was like, 2,000, like 1,500, 1,500. And then, oh, sorry, 8,000. I was like, what? Someone bid 8,000 in the room. I was like, okay. Would you like to try one more? Sure. 10,000, sorry, 13,000. I was like, oh no, like, okay. And then when I won, I was like, what have I done? But I hadn't seen it in almost 2 years. I just received it. Dan helped me ship it out, and I couldn't be happier.
Well, it's a beautiful looking piece, that's for sure. And you've got to remember, I mean, a whole other topic of conversation there, and I know you've had Thomas and other auctioneers on as well, but I've never
episode.
You've got to laugh when you read through auction catalogs at the estimate prices. Remember why they're putting them like that. They want to be able to say at the end of the day they sold at X time the total auction estimate. So you've got to be somewhat cynical when you look at these things, and we all get sucked into looking at auction catalogs thinking, oh, maybe I'll buy that one because look at the estimate price. And then
I know, I was like 3,000
like the Corey Richard, the Corey Richard, Everest one. I bid, I registered to bid on that, and I'm glad.
I know the guy who bought it though. I think he bought it for was it
105 something thousand US or something. So okay. In the interest of time, Lung Ling, I'm going to keep this one short because you and I know each other well, and I'm sure we'll be able to share another cigar and Bertie sooner or later. But it's been nice to have you back in Hong Kong for a while now. I know you were back in Singapore for a lot of time over the last couple of years. So the question is, Hong Kong or Singapore? Just to put you on the spot. Where would you prefer to be? Okay, I'll give you a little bit more of a clue to that as to when one thinks about watches and watch collecting, and I know you've got a lot of friends in Singapore as well in the watch business and community as well.
Mhm.
So do you see a big difference at all between the two? Maybe that's an
Okay.
easier way of phrasing the question. What's the difference between Hong Kong and Singapore in terms of the watch collecting community?
Okay, I think, okay, first, just to answer, because I think in the past week with like the potential lockdowns happening, right? Just I've had tons of friends just message me like, why are you not flying out? Why are you not leaving Hong Kong? And then it made me realize that, okay, I do have the option to leave Hong Kong and just hide out in Singapore for a while, but it doesn't solve the actual problem that you still have a life here and you still have to come back, right? So I actually think that, like, okay, I'm not born, this is a long-winded answer, but I'm not born an optimistic and positive person, but I have, like, I think done a really good job over the past, I think at least minimum 30 years of my life, like rewired myself to be a very positive person. So even hearing, okay, there is potential lockdowns and the current situation that we're in, I'm actually very happy. Like I wake up every day and I feel like, oh my God, now I have more time to record a podcast, to do this and do that. And so I'm okay. And I just try and make the best out of everything, right? The situation I'm in.
Good. Well done.
And with watch collecting, the COVID has also highlighted two things, because it's shown that the way my friends, okay, just watch collectors, right? And people who are in the hobby, they are generally more calm, like with the situation. I mean, they have had like, they've been getting 50,000 cases per day for a while already, right? But from the beginning, from day one, when this was happening, when it started with 10,000 every day, they were like, yeah, we have faith in the government. There's a plan. Everything will take care of itself. So they were still very happy, like just actually shopping for watches online, just looking for other avenues to enjoy the hobby. Whereas I think with Hong Kong, we kind of get this feeling like if you get COVID, you're a criminal. Everyone needs to avoid you and you're going to get sent to camp, right? So
Yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely.
negativity around it instead of being like, don't worry, there's a plan. Like it will, like we're not going to live in this situation forever. So watch collecting wise, I do kind of miss Singapore in the sense that people are just calm and they're patient and they find other ways to enjoy the hobby. And a lot of the people that I meet up with in Singapore, we'll go to a wine bar, we'll look at watches. They have kind of even shifted into new hobbies. So they're now studying cigars. So it just makes me appreciate that people there have this kind of like very slow and like kind of like island mentality, like take life easy and like, yeah, that's what
Well,
I
you
like.
have the advantage of being able to live both options and not in normal circumstances, being able to enjoy and live both options. And you know me, the question is born out of being Singaporean by birth, and yet here I am spending my working years in Hong Kong. So I have an affinity with both countries as well. So it would be difficult for me to choose if I were put on the spot, to be honest. But you know, we'll come through all of this, and I'm keeping a bit more of a low profile as case numbers rise in Hong Kong, just because I'm post-surgery and trying to focus on recovering from that. But yeah, it won't be long before we're sharing cigars again.
Definitely.
Right. Well, we'll go to the pump push around, and Jacqueline, shoot.
Okay, so on the waiting list, we're big readers here. What would be your one book recommendation that you've read recently or just overall?
Well, I don't tend to read a lot of fiction. I tend to read history, factual stuff. I've got a pile of books both here and in Switzerland just waiting to be read as part of my retirement project, which still waiting to be read because I thought I'd have a lot more time on my hands, and it seems I don't. I get a lot of pleasure out of just diving deeper into watch books. So I'm trying to think specifically. Right now, I'm in the middle of two books. One is charting the history of the Lancaster bomber in the Second World War back in the 1940s, and following some crew stories of their experiences during that. And the other one is by a Hong Kong historian. Well, no, not a historian. And I read it from a sense of slight bemusement, just recognizing how much Hong Kong has changed in a relatively short period of time over, let's say, 40 years. Because it's a story of a British maritime police officer who, in his time and his whole career, spent in charge of one of the maritime police patrol boats, going through the time of the Vietnamese boat people exiting and trying to escape what was happening there, through to smuggling across border between Hong Kong and so forth, but also full of anecdotes about what is now 1881 heritage and what was the old maritime police headquarters here in Hong Kong, and the old mess officers, and just sort of a slight sense of bemusement as to, those old days are definitely very different, and rightly so, to what where we are in now in Hong Kong, in terms of the way things are operating. But I don't have a quick short one, I'm afraid, that gives you any sort of meaningful life stories.
Well, if you like those books, right, you like the history side, I got to recommend, I recommended the Cartier book by Cartier Brickwell. Like, it has that historic side to it and is non-fiction, but reads very well. Found that a great book. And then there's also The Grand Complication, which I don't know if you've read, but it's details the two arguably biggest Patek collectors, Packard and Henry Graves, and their journey and their rivalry, and it goes into their life and what happened in their life, and it really did change my perspective, on the watch journey. And fantastic book, set in history. You go through a period of American history. It takes you through, and I did enjoy that journey because you learn from that history as well. So yeah, two books maybe.
That's good. Thanks for the tips. Yeah.
Right. So number two, when you used to hire people, apart from obviously being skilled at what they're supposed to do for their job, what were the other factors, human factors, that you look for? And were there any particular questions that you asked that you thought were unique to you?
By the time I would typically be interviewing somebody, I would assume that their skills had been thoroughly tested, and that the people were competent at their jobs. So for me, it becomes more a question of personality and fit within a team. I wouldn't necessarily ask any specific question, but what I was very much interested in was the process of the conversation and the interaction I would have. And so, every question or every quip or every little aside would be with a view to actually eliciting an indication of the behavior and the person's character and personality. And thereby allowing me to assess their fit within a team. It's important not to necessarily have everybody who is similar. In fact, the opposite. You want people with very different characteristics, personalities. I've already alluded to the fact that, I'm great at driving forward or having a vision around a project and being able to put in place the structure and the skeleton frameworks around how we might deliver on something. When it comes down to the execution, I need the expert people around about me who have this particular specialism, but I need them to be able to work with everybody else as well. So it's occasionally good to have people who may, rub you up the wrong way, to put it bluntly, on occasion. So I think as a hiring manager, the worst thing you can do is surround yourself with people who are like you. You want people who bring something different to the table, who may annoy you, who may challenge you, who may irritate you from time to time, but you value them because of the very fact that they are not you, that they are bringing something different.
Mm.
Okay. Good answer. Number 3, the hardest thing about retirement.
I haven't found it yet.
Wow. Okay.
Just enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, it's 9 months. It's 9 months in. I always said I'd allow myself a year and reflect. And yes, we've talked about the fact that through circumstances I haven't been able to do any or many of the things. Certainly, I've explored a lot more of Hong Kong in terms of getting out on trails. Done a lot more rock climbing here in Hong Kong as a result of being able to get out midweek rather than just at weekends. So I've done some amazing rock climbing here in Hong Kong, which has been fantastic. I've been out on some trails up in the New Territories, which I wouldn't have done previously. But no, there's nothing. I have zero regrets about having retired. It might have been easy to say, well, I wish I had just kept working another year. But then I think about everything that I have been able to do, even in spite of the challenges that we've faced over the last year. Then no, there's nothing that I would point to at all, Daniel.
I have a follow-up question, which is, do you think you will ever come out of retirement? Industry person, Jean-Claude Bivac recently came out of retirement, right, to do something. So do you see yourself coming out of retirement?
I'm very clear on one thing for certain, Jackson, that is that I want to own my own calendar. I want to be the master of my time. So I would never ever go and work somewhere where, if there ever was such a thing, a 9-to-5 job, where I was an employee at whatever level, even if I was a CEO, in fact, especially if I was a CEO of something or at a senior leadership position of something, because that demands much more commitment from you in terms of leadership, because the tone is always set from the top. So it is by exemplifying the drive and the skills and the integrity and the tone as a leader that that pushes forward the success of a business. So I'm very clear that I will never, a lot of people assume that when I announced that I was going to retire, so I think I publicly announced it in January 21 ahead of retiring at the end of June, because by then the press would start getting wind of it, and because of the regulatory stuff that we would have to go through as well. A lot of people assume that I would pop up somewhere else, 6 months later after a non-compete type thing, and that I was going on, but I was absolutely clear. I'd worked for one company for 25 years. I was loyal to them. I know it's anachronistic in this day and age, but a great believer in the culture and the values of the company I work for. Admire it hugely. Would never imagine myself working anywhere else. Mm. So that's, I'd definitely never go back to full-time work. The beauty of being retired is you have the opportunity to speak to people, to do a lot more different things. I'm on the board of the Himalayan Trust, as I mentioned. I want to give more of my time to that, assuming I can get back to Nepal. And I'm enjoying dabbling around in the fringes of the watch industry. Should something present itself, and I'd love to get involved, but on my own terms and on my own time, and not because money is driving me. Quality of life and experiences and friendships and people, and that's what's most important to me.
Okay, my next question is a daily habit that you have kept throughout your career and now retirement.
None. Actually, that's quite weird. I can answer that quite quickly.
Yoga.
Yeah, no, not even. I don't have habits. I mean, you know, I can imagine some people saying, I pick out the watch I'm going to wear and then choose my clothes accordingly. So choose the watch first and then put the clothes on to match whichever watch I'm wearing. But genuinely, I'm not a creature of habit in a structured, you know, I must conform, and I'm not superstitious at all. I don't have superstitions. I'm not a person who I have to put in a left cuff link before a right cuff link or something like that. I don't have these sorts of habits. Maybe I'm just a bit more simple and happy-go-lucky.
For sure. Next question. Oh, it's your turn to ask, Dan.
Oh, yeah. The next guest we should have on that you think would be good and that maybe you could facilitate.
Well, I don't know if I can facilitate it, but I think I've said this to you before, Daniel, but I'd love to hear from Julie Crowlers, who, for listeners who don't know, I've admired from a distance, who's an illustrator. I'm sure she would probably be very resentful of me terming her as such. I don't know, an artist who draws fabulous pictures of watches, and she was invited on to GPHG as well as part of the voting committee for the most recent GPHG. And I'm intrigued to learn more about her. Again, it's just inquisitiveness as to what's her background, what brought her into watches, how is she now making a career out of illustrating watches. And I can't necessarily facilitate that for you, but I would be very interesed to hear
I have my
her.
ways. Don't worry. I'm very
convincing.
I'm
sure I can reach out and say hello, and I'll commission a piece. By the way, that was a misleading point of entry. I actually want you to speak to the waiting list podcast. But yeah.
Okay. Long, you have the last three.
Question. What is something about Hong Kong culture that you have picked up that has changed how you think or behave?
Until I broke my shoulder, I find myself walking around the streets with my head buried in my phone, walking into people like everybody else. And I wished I hadn't picked that behavior up. It seems to be we live in a little bubble world of our phone and 2-foot radius rather than Hong Kong's a melting pot. Its strength is its resilience. The changes it's going through, for some, are uncomfortable, of course. We're unfortunately seeing a lot of exodus from Hong Kong at the moment. But you go back over centuries, and what's true of Hong Kong is how it's continued to reinvent and be resilient. And I don't doubt that will continue to be the case. Why I like it so much is because of the opportunity to open your eyes and observe and listen and learn, and just recognize and be open to experiences that you're not familiar with. And in spite of the fact that I grew up in Asia, I'm always learning still. Cantonese is still too much of a struggle for me beyond taxi language, I'm afraid, I have to admit.
Okay. Where is the perfect place to retire?
Edinburgh, Hong Kong, and Switzerland.
Okay.
Why not Singapore? Why not Singapore?
Yeah, well, maybe that's an insight into, in spite of having been born and grown up in Singapore. I mean, I do love Hong Kong, but I'm not sure I could retire to one place. Is probably the best way of answering that. I'm too energized by experiences, and those can be very different in the nature of those experiences. They may be expensive on one hand, they can be cheap as chips and living in a tent in the mountain on the other hand, boiling snow to create water for your soup. So retiring in one place to me feels like my worst nightmare.
This is the last one.
Ooh.
One thing that you want to do that you haven't done yet.
Probably difficult.
I could answer that in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way or in a very, very serious way, but there's all different ways of answering that, really. Let's think, what have I not done that I'd really like to do? Yeah, the tongue-in-cheek ways would probably be X-rated, so let's leave those aside. It's not that I haven't necessarily done it. It's that I would like to spend more time doing some of these things. And I think my wife and I were reflecting the other night on just how fortunate we were that we took advantage of the ability to travel in Asia before COVID. And so what I'd like to do more of, not that I haven't done it, is spend more time traveling in China and Japan in particular. And I've spent a lot of time in China, I've spent a lot of time in Japan, but in many instances this has been through work rather than pleasure. And I would feel somewhat regretful if we were ever to leave Hong Kong and move back to Europe. I say leave Hong Kong. I would hope that by the time we're permanent residents, we'd always find ourselves coming back to Hong Kong from time to time. But I would feel regretful if we hadn't been able to spend more time exploring. So that was a bit of a cop-out answer, wasn't it, Lung Lung?
No, this is good. Great answer.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I kind of think, while we're recording this podcast, I was like, yeah, forget the podcast. I'm just here to have fun and chill with my friend. And I had a great time, especially the fact that I'm recording this in quarantine. It was a great experience for me. So thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure, and I'm sorry. I know I do waffle on a lot. So you can feel free to edit this into a fifth of the time that we've taken talking about. So for listeners, when you do end up listening to this was actually an 8-hour conversation we've just had.
Well, actually, I was listening to Cole Walliser yesterday, and that's just literally just over an hour. And I thought, well, that was a bit short. I thought, is that it? Is that over so quickly? So I'm kind of maybe getting used to this. I just put it on when I'm working and I'm just listening, and it's just very, it helps the fact that I'm in quarantine as well, right? I have no human interaction, and it was very, very pleasurable.
It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure just chatting with you guys, and I do see it as that. I don't necessarily think anybody's going to learn from me, but it's fun chatting with the three of you. And Jacqueline, I really look forward to the time that you and I can meet in person in Geneva, hopefully, or wherever it might be. But in the meantime, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it a lot.
Okay, guys, we'll see you on the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
As always, thank you for listening to the Waiting List podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. And if you have any questions,
comments,
or feedback,
feel free to reach out to us at the Waiting List Podcast on Instagram or via our private accounts.
We'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.